Joining me now is the keynote speaker at the Status of Women Council's Provincial AGM and the co-founder of the Slutwalk. It is Heather Jarvis. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So you're in the province, and this is an interesting time, of course, because it seems now, finally, there will be an event here next summer in this province, and joining lots of other Canadian cities, of course. Can you take us back to 2010 when the comments were made by the Toronto police officer that led to the initial Slutwalk?
Sure. It was actually early 2011.
Okay.
A Toronto police officer was speaking on a university campus about safety, and the advice that he gave was, don't dress like a slut and you will not be victimized. And this is not the first time this has been said by a police officer, and it's certainly not the last. So Slutwalk came out of this from a place of being very angry at hearing this kind of advice that puts the blame on that of the victims. Mm-hmm. Victims need to be believed and need to be supported, not told it was their fault. The very basis of sexual violence is that they had no choice. So we organized an event in Toronto specifically to challenge sexual violence, victim blaming, and slut shaming. And before we knew it, it was resonating around the country and then around the world. And in the years since, there's been over 200 cities around the world that have had their own events.
It's an amazing story. I'm sure you have regularly been engaged in conversation about the name. And have you ever had any any doubts whatsoever about the title of the walk?
I think that's a hard question to ask because it's certainly been controversial. But what I find disappointing is that so many people say the name is offensive when they're not expressing nearly the same kind of outrage and offense at the fact that sexual violence is happening every day in our communities, and people in positions of power who are supposed to be there to support survivors are turning around and calling them sluts and telling them that if they had dressed differently, they would have been fine, which is not true.
Yeah, I don't find it as much offensive as I just wonder how effective it is, because I can imagine that there are perhaps women who would be reluctant to join the walk because of it's called a slut walk, and that implies that they themselves might be in some way considered a slut, I suppose. And also I'm wondering about the people who might show up to observe the walk, and I'm wondering if the police would find no better way to round up a lot of misogynists and perverts, perhaps, than go to the sidewalks right next to where this slut walk is happening.
Well, I can tell you that the name came from that police officer's comment. He essentially chose our name for us. And a big part of what these events do is they stop dancing around the topics and say, we have to talk about the issues that so many people are scared to talk about and are avoiding talking about. And one of the hugest ways that victim blaming and slut shaming is perpetuated are through labels and these kinds of words that are thrown at men and women and even children to suggest that they had it coming or they were asking for it. And it doesn't actually come down to this particular word. There are too many words like slut that represent the same idea, that somehow if you label somebody something, they are less worthy of support and safety and of being believed. And I mean, we see these ideas everywhere, even the conversations that have happened today alone about the MP being accused of sexual harassment. People are immediately suggesting that it's an allegation and showing more concern for his career than for what sexual harassment does.
But you have to do that until you have to do that until you find out if it's indeed true. You just can't assume guilt. You have to err on the side of caution and say that people are innocent until proven guilty, don't you?
Well, I disagree. I think we can offer respect to both sides and say our current system suggests innocence, but the second we say innocent until proven guilty, we are also telling all of those women, all of those children, that we doubt them and we immediately think that they are guilty for what they're saying.
Well, I don't know. I mean, anybody can make an allegation. I don't know if you can just assume that there has to be something to it every time. I mean, there are perhaps more than one reason why somebody can make an allegation in any context. But I tell you,
the majority of people who make false allegations is minuscule. People need to be believed when they say, I was assaulted, I was harassed, and our communities need to show support that impacts people, and that pain is carried with them for years.
But don't you reserve belief until evidence supports the allegation? I mean, that's basically how things go.
Crimes, evidence is scarce because that's the nature of the crime. Right. And I can tell you right now, the amount of people who might listen to this and hear, well, I'm going to believe that he didn't do it. You're giving the message to them that you're not a safe space for them to come to.
What's the problem with saying I just don't know? I don't know until we know more, until some investigation has happened. I mean, right away, there's no question that there is damage done regardless. I mean, anybody who's accused of certain things has a very difficult time, even if exonerated in the end, removing that stain from their reputation, right?
But I challenge you to show just as much concern, if not more, for the people who've experienced harassment and assault. I haven't heard a word of concern from you about them.
I don't think I gave any indication that I have anything but concern for anybody who might be abused or assaulted. I mean, but that doesn't mean that you have to go the opposite direction either. I'm staying neutral on this.
And I don't think that neutral
you seem to suggest that being neutral is favoring one side.
And unfortunately it is, because when we say, I'm not making a decision, we're giving the message to say, I'm choosing not to believe you. I'm choosing not to believe that you've been through something tragic and you need support right now. That's what neutrality does. And I'm not saying we have to assume everybody's evil, but I think we can play both sides and say, I'm going to wait to hear more about this because I wasn't involved, but right now, it's really unfortunate that we're continuing to hear stories about sexual harassment and sexual violence. And if that has happened to anybody, we believe you. We're here for you.
Well, I think the nature of neutrality is you don't believe either side. You're not favoring either side. We're saying we're going to stay in the center until we get some good, solid evidence to tell us exactly what is the truth.
And this is why events come out like Slutwalk and like Take Back the Night and so many others, is because the majority of people who are sexually assaulted do not come forward because of the experiences that they have when they do. They're told, we won't believe you until we hear solid evidence, which frequently doesn't exist because of the nature of this crime.
Well, boy, I tell you, we're in a pretty tough place if we start acting without evidence, if we start taking everybody's word for it right off the get-go, regardless of which side they're on.
I don't think we are. To say to somebody as an individual, I'm sorry you went through that, I believe you, does so much good for them, and it doesn't harm other people.
It seems to me that the women who've come forward in the Jean Ghomeshi case are being taken very seriously and are given full credibility for their statements. I don't recognize in any of that. I mean, no doubt there are extremes and there are people on both sides who are, but generally speaking, I think it's fair to say the public response to it has been fairly empathetic towards the women who have come forward.
But we're talking about assaults that have been happening over decades, and how many women never came forward and were told that they couldn't have possibly been true, and how many women immediately were on the side of Jean Ghomeshi himself and said, no, he's a good man, we like him, this couldn't have happened.
Well, as I say, I think the safest thing to do is...
there are more women out there who haven't come forward.
Yeah, but if you remain neutral then, you're essentially saying, well, we're going to wait and see. It doesn't mean we believe or disbelieve the allegations or the defense of the person that has been, and
I guess we could disagree. I want to encourage everybody who's listening that if somebody comes to you and discloses that they have been sexually assaulted, listen and believe them.
And I'm going to suggest that potentially is a slippery slope. But in any case, we know now that there is going to be an event here next summer called the Slutwalk, whether people agree with it or not, and they will be able to participate or observe or otherwise support or, I guess, ignore the event. And we don't know exactly what it is. Well, I really hope people don't ignore sexual violence. I didn't say that. I said ignore the Slutwalk, which is not necessarily the same thing. I know, but I'm just suggesting if it's not for everybody, that's okay. There's so many ways to get involved in supporting communities. Well, as I suggested, there may be people who will avoid it just because of the name, and they think that perhaps it would have been better termed, I don't know, the Slutwalk or some other, variation which would allow them to more readily be associated with it or participate themselves. Whether people agree or disagree, I think what's great is it will start discussions just like the one we're having, because we have to talk about these issues as they're going on. And on that, we can agree. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Heather Jarvis, co-founder of the Slutwalk. And as I said, she was here, or is here in the province as the keynote speaker for the Status of Women Council's provincial AGM.